Mm.
Good evening. Welcome to this month's webinar. Did you see that? Mining for Grammatical Gold, presented by the North American Cambridge Classics Project and sponsored by Cambridge University Press. We are so happy to have Joe Davenport as our guest presenter this evening. Joe has been teaching with the Cambridge Latin course at Norwell Middle School in Massachusetts for over 40 years. He is truly an expert at all things Cambridge Latin course. He's also a member of the NACCP board and the National Latin Exam Writing Committee. He was the former co-chair of ACL's middle school committee and has also received ACL's Meritus Award. He has done many webinars for us at NACCP. He's also a regular presenter at our annual summer workshop in July. So we welcome Joe this evening. And before we get started, just as a reminder, the webinar will be recorded. We'll post the link in a few days on our website, cambridgelatin.org. And if you need a professional development certificate for this evening's webinar, just please email training@cambridgelatin.org. Training@cambridgelatin.org, and we'll get a professional development certificate to you very quickly. And on that note, Joe?
Thank you. So am I all set to screen share, do we think? Just waiting to get the permission. Okay, I should be sharing now, and
We can see you.
all right, how's that?
Good.
Got the slide? All right. So we're going to talk here about going back and looking at our stories for grammar. It's not the first thing I do. I always start out reading the text out loud in Latin, often with me first as a model, and then as time goes on, students working in pairs. Oral reading in small sections of text with phrasing emphasized through vocal pauses are very useful in getting them to start to see the actual phrases that are occurring in the language and not seeing it as just a string of separate words. Small sections of text help focus the student and helps with a fear that they might have when they see this entire page of text and wonder, what am I going to do with all this? After reading a block of text, I have students discuss it quickly in pairs or small groups. And I ask students then to tell me one thing they think that occurred in that part of the story. I hold off any comprehension questions for later. I want them first to try and share what it is they know. I want the emphasis to be on what they know first. If they're reticent about volunteering, then I might ask some simple comprehension questions to try to elicit their participation. But I want to keep the focus on what they know so that we can piece the story together as a group. So this first reading is always about comprehension of the storyline in general, and then important details in the story. So you can see how I might have, even the very first story that we've had, I'll actually divvy it up into smaller sections that make it more comprehensible for the students. After that, I will then go back to that block of text and ask questions that, after we've understood what the story is about, that's when we go back and I might ask questions to focus on a particular grammatical structure. As you can see here, I'm trying to focus on the prepositional phrases, okay? What two-word phrase in Latin from this section tells us where quintus is? What two-word Latin phrase tells us where Cabarrus is, okay? This might occur right after our reading discussion or on another day as a follow-up reading of the same passage, depending on the length and difficulty of the story and how well the class understands it. Sometimes we can get through and they have a really good understanding of the story right off the bat, and we can actually go to the next level. Sometimes it takes that first class to get the understanding of the story in place. And then I'll go back to it another day. We'll go back and reread a section of the story or all of the story, and then start to look at these grammatical structures. Reading texts that they already know is actually an excellent reading practice and is actually really good for their own morale. To see something that, oh, this is in Latin, but I actually know what's going on. Um, and I might also have them put parentheses. I might do this on the screen itself with input from the students. I might have them come to the screen and do the parentheses, or they might even do it on a printed handout, so that now they're going back and they're identifying and looking at dealing with these prepositional phrases as an individual structure. I use the same sort of procedure reading wise when we go on to stage 2, and I'm starting to deal with accusatives. We're still asking questions like, where is Caecilius? So we're reminding them about the prepositional phrases, but also, whom is the friend greeting? And continue that as we go through the sentences. And then when we get to the end of the first batch, I'll actually put the pairs of sentences on the screen together so that the changes in the endings are very obvious, and then ask them, okay, well, who is doing sentence number 2? Who is doing the greeting? And then who is sentence 1 about? And they both refer to Caecilius. How is the word changed? Why is it changed? Um, and my main objective in this stage 2 is simply to get them to recognize the M's, calling it accusative, dealing with declensions. That's going to come up in the next stage. I don't want to deluge them with too much information at once. Um, as we go through the stories, I'm also asking those questions. Whom is the friend visiting? Whom does Clemens greet? What is Caecilius counting? What is Grumio cooking? Again, always trying to get them to talk about those accusatives, to look at them and say them. Then I might go back later and have a written handout that we would use. This 4-story handout of Inforo, Artifex, Tonsor, and Wainalikius, where I'm going to have them either underline or highlight the accusative words as they find them. Now, this is not going to be one lesson. This is actually going to be 4 lessons over time. They're going to be collecting these accusatives as we're going through the stage so that they have lots of examples to look at the end. As you can see in each section, in parentheses, I've told them how many accusatives it is that they should be looking for in this story. So they know that in the first story, they're looking for 9, 25 in the artifacts, 7 in Tonsor, 28 in Wainalikius if we get to and need that as reinforcement. I would do the first story in Foro. They would do that with me, so they get an idea of how to go about doing this and how it works. Then when we go on to do the story artifacts, I'll probably put them in pairs and be circulating around the room as they're working on it so they can access me if they need information about vocabulary or aren't sure about a particular word, so I can help direct them in the right direction. And then something like tonsor, there's only 7. It's a small amount of text. That's something then I might have them try to handle on their own, maybe in class or as part of homework. This gives us a lot of accusative examples to work with. And if I feel they need more, then we can go on and also do Wainalikius. um, we wind up with a total of 69 examples of the accusative. So they're seeing it and saying it and finding it over and over again. And once they have all these examples, then they're ready to start sifting through them and start looking for, all right, well, are all these examples exactly the same, or there are some ways in that they are different? And they start seeing the AMs, the UMs, the EMs, and from that, then we can start to evolve the idea of a declension. So these are just how I would project it on the board when we're going over the answers, or they're doing it with me. They might go to the board and underline it, the screen, or I might just move the circles. And then that way we have all these examples projected there for them to see and double check up on in their own work. Can do similar activities with verbs, infinitives, things like that, where again, we've read a story, we understand it, and then I might go back at this point, say when we're doing aorist, they've seen uh, simple imperfect and perfect tense verbs. And so now I want them to go back and find some of them. And so I'm giving them the small paragraph and saying, okay, find me the word, the Latin word that's going to be they were hurrying or he was living. So we can pick out those examples, separate them, and start looking at them and comparing them. Um, Here we're doing a similar thing with a handout of the story Tripodus argentii. Again, always trying to vary the level of difficulty as you're going along. With the accusatives, I was doing it with them, and then they were working in pairs, then they were working alone. Here we're starting off, I'm giving them a section of the text, and I'm telling them, I'm bird dogging for them exactly where to look. Line 2, there's an infinitive in there somewhere. Line 7, line 8, line 9. Now they've had that practice. We make sure we found those. Then they're ready to go on to the next section, and now I'm not bird dogging specific lines, but I'm giving them a range of text and saying there are 4 examples in here. See if you can find them. So that if they only find 3, they know I've got to keep looking and try and find that 4th one. And then when we get to the 3rd level, I'm simply giving them a range within which to look and not necessarily a specific number, because by now they have had a good amount of practice with the infinitives and should be able to deal with it better on their own. Something new I've done in the first few years, I call like what's missing. And it's sort of an offshoot of maybe kind of fill in the blank exercises or close exercises. But what I'm looking for is automatic recall. I'm showing them a sentence and then I'm going, what's missing? And they spit back into Blino. If they're completely blank, I'll go back again. What's missing? So they're spitting back, they're saying that infinitive and thinking about it. Okay, and what's missing? And we're doing this repeatedly. Sometimes I've added a little difficulty here. The excerpt always starts with the full text and then them remembering and supplying the missing items. It can be done in general, but it's more useful when it's focused on a particular structure. So you could do it with lots of different words within a story. If you're going for them being able to remember what the story was about, or you focus it if you want a particular grammatical structure. In this case, we're going back to infinitives. You could do something, same thing with the accusatives or the datives. And the idea here is, well, it can be done orally, projected on a screen. You could even conceivably do it on a printed handout by having the text and then the text repeated with the missing element. The idea is to get them to focus their working memory on the pattern and then store the pattern and retrieve it repeatedly. It seems like it's just a lot of repetition. It's actually, they seem to really like it because it's a bit of a little uh, competition there for them to see who can say it quickest and first. What's actually happening is it's causing them, as they focus on the pattern, to store it and retrieve it repeatedly. This causes the electrical impulse carrying the information to repeatedly travel back and forth across the neurons in their brain, which strengthens the pathway so that the information is more strongly then passed on from working memory into short-term memory. That's how things are moved. And then additional practice and other more elaborate practice and other activities then hopefully help move it from short-term memory into long-term memory. Um, again, reading in small sections, asking the student to find the item, going back and having them find the same items and writing them down is important practice because it's putting in the information in and pulling it out of the brain cell over and over again, exercising neural pathways. Okay. You could do the same procedure with more complex things, say relative clauses. Um, First, I might start by having them draw their attention to the relative clause by having them look at a sentence or a short text and asking questions that make them go back and find that. So in this case, they have this sentence, and I'm asking which slaves were the forerunners, and they look at that and they say, oh, the ones that had the long sticks. Okay. But then you can also do the same thing with the missing elements. I would say that when you're starting this, to remember the entire relative clause is probably a bit much. So what I'm actually doing is I'm starting with the two important markers for the relative clause, the relative pronoun and the verb. And that's two words that they can more easily have in their working memory, be able to spit it back and then repeat it. But you can also do it with a longer amount of text where if we've done this for a while, we've practiced individual sentences with relative clauses. I might give them a paragraph and then have missing elements in the paragraph, and then a different set of missing elements. So we're going through the pattern and having them remember and repeat these markers. You can even continue to do that if you think your students are capable of by leaving out the entire relative clause, depending on how long the relative clause is. 3, 4 words, 5 words is fine. Longer than that might start to be a bit difficult for their working memory. Um, I'm going to take a break here before I go back and just check and see if there are any questions so far in the chat. Probably not, but we'll just see.
Not so far.
Okay, then we're good to keep on trucking. Um, Then to go to the next level with relative clauses, I will give them some parameters for what they're looking for when they're trying to identify them, or sort of a definition, but more a list of parameters that you're looking for these kinds of words for it to begin with, that you're looking for a verb, often at the end, that it should be modifying some kind of a noun and acting like an adjective, so it should be answering an adjective type question. And I tend to do adverbial clauses at the same time that we're doing these relative clauses, so that they learn them and can try to keep them separate. Then after we've read and discussed the parameters that they're looking for, then I'll actually go on with some of the parameters listed and a block of text where they start to try and find them and let me know. And then we identify them on the screen. So they would tell me, oh, qui virgas longos tenibat. So I would underline that for them so that they realize that's one of them. And then maybe quae ernam et tripodibus portabat. Quad totum viam complebat, which is a tricky one because the quad can go because or which, and so they need to make sure they're looking at context. One of the parameters we said is look at what is it modifying, and here looks like we're modifying the noun procession, and so that leads us to believe that this should be a relative clause, not an adverbial. Then I might take some of the stories and actually have them working in class and then probably finishing up as homework, going through a story and identifying the relative pronouns, the relative clauses, sorry. And again, changing levels of difficulty. This first time we're doing it, I've got all the parameters at the top and I'm bird dogging all the clauses they need to go. I'm telling them line 2, go find one, line 4, line 5 to 6, line 8. Because this first time, I just want them to find and see successfully a lot of examples. Okay. Then when we do this later, after we've had some practice, I might start leaving out some of the parameters because I think some of us know that sometimes students do not read directions. They just skip over the directions and guess at what you want them to do. So to make sure they're paying attention to the directions, I'll actually do this where I'll leave out words from the directions and they have to put them in. And then when we go to find our clauses, I'm not leaving them all to their own devices yet, but I want them to start finding some of them on their own. So the first 3, I've not told them where they are, but when it comes to 4, 5, 6, 7, I've told them what specific line numbers to look at, which then, of course, signals to them, all right, I've got to find those first 3, and they've got to be in the first 14 lines. That's where I need to concentrate. So they're not trying to look through the entire story, okay? I want to help keep them focused so they're not getting terribly frustrated, okay? They might do this at home for homework once they're really advanced, but in the middle, after they've done it with me, I also have them work on one of the stories in pairs or in small groups so that they can not only help one another, but have exposure to the thought process of other students. How are other people doing this? I'm not sure how to do this, but that person over there seems to know how to do it. Let me see if I can understand how they're doing it. And then, of course, the capstone would be to be able to do that without any of the line numbers, right? Also, by the way, I do let them know that relative clauses I also refer to as adjectival because that's what they do. They act like adjectives and they are different from adverbial. And I let them know that adjectival is what I'm going to call them, but grammar books will call them relative clauses because the word they start with is called a relative pronoun. But actually, adjectival clauses, I think, is much more descriptive and more to the point for them. A different thing here. I'm gonna talk a little bit about we're looking for different sentences in different person and numbers. We're looking for I sentences, you sentences, he, she, it sentences, and they sentences. So after we've seen that in the stories in stage 4 and 5, in this particular case, to keep the narrative movement going along, instead of going back to a story, I've actually given them an additional story that we're gonna quickly read, and then go back and work on it for finding these different kind of sentences. Um, you always want to be conscious of your narrative momentum, and you don't want the class to feel like they're bogged down on a particular thing. They should always feel like they're reading a story and moving forward through a story. Um, so this particular, you can get these supplemental stories. This happens to be a Cambridge Latin course worksheet from the online version, Ubi es Grumio. But you can also find it's found in the teacher resources part of the website. You can also find lots of these stories from NACCP in the Fabulae Mirabile series. Um, so there's lots of places where you can get these extra little stories that you might want to put in when you want to go back and go over a grammatical item, but not necessarily always go back to a story you've already done. So here, after we've read it, I'm going to divide up the story into sections. And then in section A, I want them to find me one singular sentence and one plural sentence and write that down. Then we'll go over it, make sure they've got answers, understand what they did. The next section, I'm looking for one I sentence, one you sentence, and then one other singular sentence from somewhere in this section. Section C, we're looking for two singular sentences. And in the last section, it's an I sentence, a you, and a singular. So they're getting examples of each of these. They're writing them down so they can compare them sentence to sentence and see the ways in which they have changed and are different. Okay, I've even to notch it up a little level. It's not always just simple grammar like accusatives and prepositional phrases, but you can also do these kinds of things with more advanced grammatical structures. So here I'm looking at ablative absolutes. So of course, we've read through this first to make sure we understand it. And then we're going back to it, and I'm starting to ask some questions to highlight the ablative absolute structures. I might start off with a general question, like in this paragraph, what were they all waiting for? Which then bird dogs them to, they were waiting for the favor of the patron, or okay, and then follow up with the question, under what conditions were they all waiting for the favor of their patron? And then that brings them to look at and say the ablative absolute, oculis in janua defixis. Same thing with the other ablative absolute here, servo ad stante, by asking under what conditions was the girl standing her ground at the edge of the crowd. So that's going back and just drawing their attention and having them say the structure so that it's going through their working memory again. I may actually have them go back, as we did with, say, the accusatives, and highlight these ablative absolutes or underline them in a copy of the story. And then we can actually do the same thing about supplying what has been removed from the text. So they're seeing this paragraph and then what's missing. Whoop, got so big. Let me just a minute. Thank you. And same thing with the other one. And then something else, finding this structure in our stories and writing them out on a worksheet seems old fashioned, but again, it causes them to read and write that pattern repeatedly, which then makes that message go over and over again from the short-term from the working memory into the short-term memory, helping them to assimilate the structure. You can also have them continue to work with this without just going over the same structures by having them substitute a word in the structure, but changing it to make it their own original take. So here, instead of we having servo ad stante, they come up with a different, say, participle for in there, like servo clamante or servo lacrimante. Or they could change the noun that's in there to equo ad stante. And then hopefully you'll get someone who might be a little playful and say, puella equo saltante in extrema parte multitudinis constitit. The girl, with her horse dancing, was standing her ground in the edge of the crowd. So this gives them a chance to keep repeating the pattern, but playing with it in a way that they're actually creating some of the language, making it some of their own, but it's also causing them to repeat over and over again, sharing it with their friends. Can you figure out what the other people in your group came up with? Can you look at their sentence and their parcel? Can you figure out what it is? Okay. Something completely different, let's say structures like datives, for example, lend themselves well to acting out or miming. So, after we've read and understood a story again, I might have students go back and work in groups of 3 or 4 and go back to the reading and find sentences where someone is giving, showing, or telling something to someone else. Okay? Because those are the easiest ones to find and act out. Doing something for someone, which is also a dative, is a little bit more difficult to act out. So that's why I didn't include that in the list. But we would go back afterwards and probably point out to them the datives where someone's doing something for someone. So each group I would give an object. It might be as simple as a drawing of an object on a piece of paper or in a piece of cloth in this story, or in Palestra story, I might give them a foam rubber frisbee to represent the discus. And each group member, one of the group member or group members, depending on whether the sentence is singular or plural, will perform the action with the object, and the other member will receive the object while one of the group is reading the sentence aloud in Latin. Okay. Or we might also have it highlighted on the screen as well as having someone read it out loud in Latin while they're acting it out. So these are all those dative sentences where we can have these groups acting them out. Now, different ways in which you could do this. You could have all groups first look for all the sentence examples of that have the datives in them, where someone's doing, someone's saying, telling, or giving something to someone, showing something to someone, and then assign one to each group to perform. A variation on that is you could each group be assigned a set of line numbers to reread, and in their line numbers, find the dative that's in there. So group A would read the text that I've blocked in green to find their dative sentence. And group B might read lines 10 through 14 in the red box to find their dative sentence. Okay, and then again, perform them. If competition is needed, I've had some classes where kids are great at doing this, no problem. And other classes where if it wasn't a challenge in a competition, they weren't really interested. So I found ways to make the simplest things into competitions, and had some of the students who were doing the worst in my class and were the least interested all of a sudden very involved. So if you're going to do it as a competition, again, I would have each one group do a different block. You would give them each a different bit of text, and then they go up and the other groups don't know what what the other groups have as text and datas, and then the one group would go up and they would perform their dative sentence for the class, and then the other groups need to try and guess what the Latin sentence is. Now, keep in mind, this is from a story that they have read. I wouldn't have the book and the text in front of them, but it's from a story that they have read. So they have some knowledge of what the sentence might be. And if the group performing gets someone else to successfully guess their sentence, then they all get 3 points. And the group that successfully guesses, they get 2 points if they guess the correct Latin sentence, but only 1 point if they come up with an English sentence. Okay. That's just one way of trying to turn it into a bit of an activity or competition amongst the students. Now that we've had, once we've had several different grammatical structures that they've learned, we are ready to have ourselves a highlight war. This is a completely stolen idea. I think I got it from the workshop this summer. I want to say maybe it came from Natalie, but I could be wrong. I know it's not my idea, but I took it and ran with it. Okay. I give them a story. It's taped to the desk, and the story is blocked off into sections. Here's another example, smaller sections. And the idea is the students are going to sit side by side. You have 2 chairs, 1 desk. Okay. The section copy of the story is taped onto the desk. Story being divided up into sections or boxes per the previous slides. Works best if you only have one example of the grammatical item you're intending to call out in each section. And then the 2 students each have a different color highlighter. They must use their outside arm to highlight with. Otherwise, they're pushing each other around. And halfway through, or every 4 or 5 minutes, I have them switch seats to the other chair so that they get equal time using their dominant and non-dominant hands. They're not allowed to push the other person's arm or body, or otherwise they lose points. And then the caller first calls out what section they're going to look at, and then the grammatical item. So in section A, who could be the first person to highlight a prepositional phrase? And then they are looking very intently, hoping they can find it before their partner does. Or in section A, can you find someone who is receiving something? So here is the text with what the caller might be calling out. So in section A, highlight an infinitive. And so they're zipping through here and, oh, there it is. Okay. Or in section B, find me a genitive. And they're zipping through there and eventually someone might find Urbis. And this has been fairly successful. Again, You want to make sure they understand that they're going to lose serious points if they're trying to pull the other person's hand or push them out of the chair, because that does kind of happen with some of my middle school students. I'm sure you're surprised to hear that middle school students would behave like that. Um, but it's a good way to get them looking for that. And if they don't find it right away, the other person has shown them the example of that structure. So they're both looking and finding it. And if they're not finding it, the other person is finding it for them. So it's again, excellent practice. And this is done. I mean, you could conceivably do it where you're just doing one item over and over again, but you'd have to have a really specified text. When you're just using a story from the book, you're going to need to be looking at different grammatical items, not just the same one over and over again, depending on the story. And then turning to a completely different sort of note here. Something that I find is important are these. We got this as part of a course from a guy named Collins. So it says Collins writing type, but that's irrelevant. Some people use these as exit tickets. It's a chance for a student to tell you what they knew about a topic in their own words, rather than giving a test where you're asking the questions. Okay, it's a chance for them to tell you what they know in their own words, because usually it's not that they don't know nothing, it's oftentimes they don't know what it is you're asking of them, but they usually know something about the topic. And this gives you a way to help them improve their understanding. I usually do this about halfway through the process. That is, we've seen and discussed examples and patterns of things, but not formally consolidated yet, because I want to see what they're coming up with in their minds. It's not a grade, but definitely commented on. You want to, as it says on the screen, to validate, comment, and direct. You want to validate the correct information that they're giving you. Please write down 3 things you've learned about verb tenses. Some of them are in the past and some of them are in the present. Well, yeah, I'd love them to say present, perfect, and imperfect, but if they know there's a past and a present, they're on the right track. Okay. And now I'm going to write them in the comment. That's right. And what are the 2 kinds of past tenses that there could be, so that I'm directing them toward more knowledge. So again, you're trying to validate the correct information they give you. You're commenting on it, especially the incorrect information, trying to direct them so that they can improve their understanding. And this also gives you a better sense before you give a test, or when you want to give a test, as to where the class is. Clearly, if they're only getting barely the fundamentals, you haven't finished going over it enough before they have a formal test. So this is also really good feedback for the teacher as well. I am getting close to the end, so I've just about run through my notes. I wanted to see if there are any questions. Probably not, because of the small number of people we have, but just in case they are, I'd like to give some time to answer or hear comments from people.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you said this is not what you do first or even early in the process. You do reading and all that other stuff. How much time will you spend in a typical stage on the language points doing this kind of review and work?
Let's say I have a stage that has 4 stories. So I'm going to spend between 4 to 8 days on those stories, depending on how complex and how much I need to get them to understand it. And then I'm going to go back and spend at least probably 2 more days on the grammar. Some of those 8 days, when I'm going back for a second reading of a story, I might start some of that grammar before I get to the more difficult, say, worksheets or consolidation.
So you're building up to it, okay, somewhat. And the other thing is, I guess it would also depend on how challenging the language point is. Like plural accusatives probably doesn't take a whole lot of
Yeah.
extra entry, but introducing the datives or some of the perfect tenses and later on in the books, other things. Okay.
And there's really sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, I've had years where kids had incredible difficulty with relative clauses, and other years where it's nothing. Same thing with ablative absolutes. I've had students where we had to spend a lot of time in them, and others, after we'd kind of gone over it once or twice, they were like, okay, we're fine.
Yeah, I've had same was true for me too. Some years I felt like kids would tell me that we never had a pluperfect tense in English. And other times they'd be like, oh, I get it. You know. Any other questions out there or thoughts or comments?
I do have a question. You said around 8 days. How long are your classes?
It's a full-time subject at our middle school, so my classes do meet 5 times a week for about 45 minutes.
44 minutes. Okay. Do you make it through both books in let's say Latin 1 course?
So what I'm doing with my seventh graders, we're actually at a slightly more relaxed pace than we have in the past. In the seventh grade, we're doing stages 1 through 16. So the red book and half of the blue book.
Mm.
And then in the eighth grade, I actually have the luxury of having them in two different levels. So the standard level then does stages 17 through 24, 25, even 26, depending on how it goes. The advanced class, where we're trying to get them to actually do 2 years of work in one so they can skip a year, they're doing stages 17 through 34. They're finishing the green book. So at the end of 2 years, yeah, we've done Latin 1 and Latin 2 in seventh and eighth grade with those advanced students.
Mm.
Prior to this, we were actually doing stages 1 through 20 in the seventh grade and 21 through 34 in the eighth grade. And it was getting to be a bit difficult for some of them. And so we decided that we needed to back off the pace a little bit so that we weren't burning them out.
Mm. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, and it's always so difficult to, to talk about the number of days that you do anything because so much of it depends upon how many minutes you meet with your students and how many days per week. And there are so many different schedules out there. It's just really difficult to pin it down to an exact number for any kind of exercise.
And I think along with that, how well you've trained your students to work with you on things. Like I'm sure, Joe, by the time you've done this a bunch of times, these kind of things, they're well trained. They know, okay, this is what he means by that. And yeah, at one point my school did a thing where everybody was doing true cooperative learning, not just group work. And it got to a point where the kids would ask us certain questions when we'd start to talk about it, because they had the lingo and they understood what was going to be required of them, which helps your pace then, right?
Right, exactly.
And I think that's one last thing. This is really good stuff you've given us, but I do think it's something you build up. So first you do identify sentences a certain way and you teach them to work in pairs on that so that the more, not complicated, but the more in detail things you want them to do is part of the process of what they're growing towards.
Right. And a caution that I give at every workshop or webinar I ever do is do not try to go out and do all of this.
Amen.
You'll kill yourself and burn yourself out. Pick one or two things from this that you liked, that you thought might be interested, and try them. And expect that they might flop the first time you try them. But hopefully you can learn from that how to adjust it for your kids and your students, your classes. As I said before, one year I could not get this standard group to study vocabulary. but they were always like picking on one another. And so I started putting the vocabulary on the screen and had them go up in pairs to see who could give more correct meanings in 3 minutes.
Yep.
Now that they were competing against the person that they wanted to show off against, all of a sudden they wanted to do this and they were learning their vocabulary.
Absolutely.
And some of these were boys that I never thought would
No.
study vocabulary. And actually, I got a wonderful message. Someone who's one of our participants gave me this message that she has one of my former students who's now a really good Latin student and actually had said he was grateful for what I had done because he might not have made it through middle school Latin, let alone going on to high school.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. You have to do one of these things. And sometimes, depending on the kids you have in front of you, you may even have to say, we're trying something new today, and make it very clear that we're trying something new. And, unless you're really comfortable with it, you know. And the other thing is, don't compare. If you compare yourself with what you think someone else gets accomplished, you can, there's a saying, when you dare to compare, you despair. You got to kind of stay in your own lane and do your thing.
Right.
And it's not only what you, the teacher, is comfortable with, but it's the kids in front of you. And that's really the bottom line. You might be very comfortable with a particular thing that you've seen Joe do, but your kids, for whatever reason, just may not get that at all. But next year, it may be an entirely different story. So there's just so much give and take between you and the classroom of students in front of you.
And can I just say, the other thing that I always did was, I kept a copy of everything. And I had a Post-it notes that went on the front of them, and I'd say, worked well, or would have worked well, but should do it at this point, anything that helps you remember, because a year goes by and you take this thing out and you go, oh, I'm going to do that with this story, forgetting that you needed to do this other thing first. So I always kept notes to myself, so the next year I didn't make the same mistake twice.
I keep all of my lesson plans and I write notes on those lesson plans. And then as I'm going through them the next year, I read through them and to find the notes about, oh, this took twice as long as I thought it was going to take. So let's leave more time for that next year. Things like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Or I remember there was one lesson that was from one of the worksheets, and it had the title of a story. And somehow in my head, I thought, all right, we'll do the story and then we'll do the worksheet. And then I found, no, there needed to be a gap in between where we did other things, because they didn't know enough to do the worksheet, even though it was based on this story.
Right.
I'd
Anybody
like to
else have a question?
Well, this isn't a question, just a comment, Joe. I really like your use of the repetition for the pathway for the neurons, and how that moved into long-term memory, so that it would really instill that particular grammar point or whatever it is that we're teaching and they're learning. That's a really important thing, that we do practice the repetition.
Yeah, thank you.
Good point, Pat. Anybody else with a comment or a question? All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being here this evening. Our next webinar, we are skipping November due to the Thanksgiving holiday. We typically meet the fourth Thursday of the month, but the next webinar will be on Thursday, the 4th of December. And again, if you need a professional development certificate, please don't hesitate to email us training@cambridgelatin.org, and I'll get one to you very quickly. Thank you, Joe, for an excellent presentation as always. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Joe.
Good to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you again, Pat.
Good to see you all.
Pat, the trainer of trainers, right? She taught most of us.
I can't stay away.
Oh,
We
you are
learned
some.
To this day, I quote you. I can't tell you how many times I quote you. I am who I am because of who